Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the new Moondrop Kadenz. It's a single dynamic driver IEM for Moondrop. It costs 190 bucks, and if that sounds familiar, that's because this is like the fifth or the sixth IEM in this, I don't know, they call it the K line, right? It started with the Kadenz Pro, the KXXS, KXXX, the KATO, and now the Kadenz. And what's interesting about the Kadenz, apart from it being the latest, is that Moondrop is kind of indicating that this is the end of the K line for them. This is the last of the K IEMs. And well, for the past couple of weeks, I've been living with and listening to the Kadenz, and I guess I'm ready to let you know what I think. Not a whole lot else to tell you about it, apart from it being a $190 dynamic driver, so we'll get into the details. But before we do that, a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending in the Kadenz for review. If you want to check them out, I've got them linked in the description down below. But with that out of the way, let's go to the table. We'll talk about the physical form factor, what you get inside the box, the build quality, all that good stuff, fit and comfort. And then we'll also talk about the sound. We'll talk about the sound signature, how it compares, or just, I guess, how it sounds to my ear, and then how it compares with some other IEMs at a similar price range, doing kind of similar things. So here's what you get inside the box. First of all, I will show you the box because everybody wants to see the box. Cool art. I actually like that one. And what you get inside is, frankly, actually a pretty good little spread for 190 bucks. They certainly don't skimp. Let me move the IEM to the side for now and just show you this little carry case that it comes with. Again, like, this is a little bit larger. This is not really a pocketable carry case, but it's compact enough and it's well made, and it's got Moondrop's, I think, more modern, updated branding that I kind of like. I kind of like what they're doing with the cursive stuff. But let's put that to the side. They do also, interestingly, come with this little pouch. I'm not totally sure exactly why. Maybe because they are kind of like a heavy metal shell. Maybe give you something a little bit more protective to put the earpieces into, and then you could put that inside of here. I don't know. I personally couldn't be bothered to do that. But if you're concerned about scratching up your IEMs, I guess it's nice to have something like that. Other than that, you get a set of tips. And in fact, not just a set of tips, you get two sets of tips. And they, thankfully, or quite conveniently, come in a little carry case. Let me punch in on these real quick. So over here on the left, you've got kind of Moondrop's standard silicone ear tip in small, medium, and large. And then over here on the right, you've got Moondrop's more premium spring tips, also in small, medium, and large. I personally have been a big fan of spring tips, although like everything, like it kind of depends on which IEM you're using them with. In this case, I actually find that the spring tips are quite a good match for the Kadenz, as they were with the KATO. So that's what I've got on mine right here. But that is to say, it's nice that they're including all those tips. I guess I'll get to the cable next, or last. Briefly, I'll cover this. It does also come with a couple of different sets of nozzles. And on the KATO, the last model of this line of IEMs, it also came with two different nozzles that were made out of different metals that ostensibly had some sort of impact on the sound, but to my ear sounded exactly the same. It really made no difference. Here, they're going a different route. Rather than giving you a different metal or like different intentional tuning, instead they're giving you different lengths. And it might not appear obvious because the difference is quite subtle, but there's basically a long, a medium, and a short nozzle. And the difference between them is each about 1 millimeter. So like from medium to small, that difference is pretty hard to see. It might be easier to see with this one because I've got it screwed in a little bit more. There you go. Oh wait, I don't even know how I've got this range. I think if they've got those as medium and those as small. But anyway, you can see it's a slight difference, but the difference between large to small becomes more significant. And the reason that they have these different lengths is actually just to impact the fit. And we'll talk about the fit in a little bit, but some people had issues with the fit with the original KATO. I myself was one of them. And so that was kind of their way of solving that, is you've got these little screw-on nozzles that go onto the front of the IEM and allow you to adjust how deep exactly you want it to go. We'll talk a little bit more about those nozzles in a second, but I did want to briefly mention this, which is that the IEM comes with a 4.4 mil to 3.5 mil adapter in the box. It also comes with, and I'm looking around because I can't find it on my desk. It's somewhere around here, I swear. It also comes with a 4.4 mil balanced to USB-C adapter, which will allow you to connect these things to your smartphone directly if you don't have a headphone jack on it. But additionally, the USB-C dongle that it comes with has a DAC built inside of it, as they do, but it can connect with Moondrop's app, and it's got various tuning profiles, which I'll be honest, I was not that interested in. So this review is just going to be reviewing this IEM from the perspective of it being a purely analog IEM, as is my want. But it does come with that, which is, again, it's kind of a cool little inclusion with the IEM. The one thing I will say about this, now let's get into the build quality and the IEM and the cable itself. I've got a little bit of a beef here. And if you watch my channel, you might know what my beef is, but maybe not. And here's my beef. It's 4.4 mil. Now, a lot of IEMs come with either 4.4 mil or 3.5 mil as options. Some IEMs, a lot of IEMs nowadays are coming with swappable terminations. In fact, Moondrop's own Aria 2 comes with a nice swappable termination mechanism. So it's interesting that the Kadenz only comes in a 4.4 mil balanced cable. This is the only way to buy this IEM. If you want to use it 3.5, well, they've got you covered with this little dongle, but I'm not a big fan of this. In fact, with this contraption, this thing, so these are little carry cases I store all of my IEMs in. With this connected, it won't fit in my box. These are the boxes I use for hundreds of IEMs that I have in a cabinet over here. But this little dongle thing, this situation isn't compatible with it. So I'm not a big fan of it. Now, again, if you know me, I prefer 3.5 mil connections just because I like to swap between my digital audio player and my laptop and my Nintendo Switch and my Miyoo Mini and my phone and my measuring rig, and all of those have 3.5 mil connectors. My DAP has a 4.4, so I can just use it in my DAP, but if I'm using the 4.4, it just means I don't have that flexibility and I don't get anything out of 4.4. You freaks. But anyway, that's the deal with the cable. A little bit of a disappointment. But let's talk about the rest of the cable, because the rest of the cable is certainly nicely built and it's quite a handsome cable, but it does also have kind of its own issues. Like if I'm going to daily this IEM, I'll be honest, I'm going to swap out the cable for these two reasons, right? One, because it's balanced. Two, because it's just a little bit on the thick side, thick and stiff. Again, it's quite nice. It's quite premium feeling. And it's very similar to the cable that we got on the KATO, which is what I've got over here. It might actually be a little bit stiffer than the cable on the KATO. If you've got experience with that one, kind of gives you a frame of reference for it. So yeah, it's just a little bit stiff. You can see it's a little bit memory prone. It wants to keep winding itself back up. I don't know. It feels quite nice. It feels quite premium. I think it looks really handsome. And it's got, nice small hardware down here at the Y-split, which I like. It's got a chin slider that actually stays in place. It's functional. I like that. And then the other thing that I like about Moondrop's cables, almost all of their cables, is that they've got these small plastic connectors rather than big bulky metal connectors, which just gives it like a nice lightweight, easy look. And in fact, the ones that they do on the KATO cable and now here with the Kadenz cable are just even a little bit extra classier than your usual small plastic connectors. And that's maybe a small detail that most people don't care about, but that's the sort of thing that does stand out to me and I like it. But unfortunately, it's a balanced cable. It's a little bit stiff. So I'm a little mad at it. Other things to mention about the cable, okay, it does have your preformed ear hooks in it, right? And it is a standard 2-pin connector. So like I mentioned, I'm planning, if I'm going to daily this IEM, I will swap it out with another cable. And as you can see, it's slightly recessed. So you're going to want to use a cable that is also slightly recessed. One other quick note as I'm talking about these connectors, and I know this is like getting into the nitty-gritty that most people don't care about, but I don't think you'll be able to make it out really. Oh, maybe. Look at that. That's like the clearest I've seen it. There's a little R indicator on the outside of the connector, and there's a little L indicator on the outside of the left side. I got beef with these because it's just so small that I can't read it, okay? I'm looking at it now under what's effectively a microscope. My 4K camera zoomed in. So there I can see it, but I think most people are just gonna have a hard time seeing that. If you're playing around with this cable yourself, just note that you can feel that it's a little bit rougher on one side. That side goes on the outside, like this. But anyway, that will lead us into talking about the earpieces themselves, which as you can see, well, at least in my opinion, this is a handsome looking IEM. I mean, I really like the way that the KATO looks. Again, let me pull the KATO in for comparison. And the KATO it actually come in both a glossy stainless steel aesthetic as well as a matte version, although the matte version was a little bit harder to get. But it's interesting that the Kadenz is only coming in the matte finish, and to be honest, I really like it. Maybe this is going to be the sort of thing, the grass is greener, like in a year, I'll be like, oh, I kind of like the glossy KATO. But as you can see, like one downside of having a glossy stainless steel design is that it is fairly prone to scratches, whereas this matte aesthetic is not. And I don't know, it highlights for me the angles in the chamfer design, which does continue all the way around this metal shell. And it is a metal shell, if you're curious. In fact, these are very heavy shells, which I alluded to earlier. Some people had issues with the fit. Part of that issue is the weight of these IEMs. These things are heavy beasts. And if you're curious if they made the Kadenz any lighter, the answer is no. In fact, it was actually about 1.5 grams heavier per side when I measured it on my scale. So actually a little bit heavier. But I don't know. For me, it's not really a big deal. It just means that it's not the most secure fitting IEM, but that's kind of true of most single dynamic driver IEMs. Before we get too much deeper into talking about the fit, I did want to highlight one last thing about this IEM, and I don't know if I'm even going to be able to show you, because it's that, oh my gosh, can I do this without ripping there? There we go. All right, I wanted to talk about the nozzles, right? So I'm using, looks like I've got the short nozzle on here right now. The longer nozzles fit me better. But what I wanted to highlight was just how difficult it is to get ear tips off of this. It can be a little bit difficult to get ear tips on it. I'm pretty good at it, I'll be honest. It may be a little bit of a skill issue, but getting the ear tips off without ripping the ear tips, frankly, actually pretty tough, especially with these spring tips, which can be a little bit on the soft side. So yeah, I don't know. That is just to say, be warned and be careful as you're removing the ear tips. But with that out of the way, let's show these things in my ears and kind of talk about the fit on the Moondrop Kadenz. So like I mentioned, I'm using the long nozzle, although apparently I've got it on the short nozzle over here because I was doing some testing to see what that difference felt like. And just giving it, you know, the extra couple of millimeters of reach, especially with a large Moondrop spring tip. And normally I wear like a medium spring tip with most other IEMs, but with this, because it fits a little bit shallower, a little bit further outside of my ear canal, I find that wearing a larger spring tip works, and still further giving it that a little bit of extra reach with the longer nozzle seems to help out actually with the fit stability. Now it's still not going to be as stable as something like a custom or semi-custom fit resin molded shell, but for a single dynamic driver IEM, you can see as it fits here in my ear, described as pretty squarely as a medium fitting IEM. Have no issues with driver flex, even though it does have some edges and stuff on the outside. I don't feel them on my ears, so I don't have any issues with comfort. And generally, I would say that this is a fine fitting dynamic driver IEM, neither fantastic nor awful. And in fact, I find that the grippy spring tips, again, in this wider fit, actually work out quite well. But okay, I think that is about as much as I can talk about the physical form factor. I've talked too much, to be honest, about the form factor. Let's get into talking about the sound here on the Moondrop Kadenz. And for that, let's pull up the squigs, all right? So if you want to take a look at this for yourself, I do have this up on SquigLink right now, link in the description. But while we're here together, let's talk about the frequency response of the Moondrop Kadenz. And if you're curious, I did measure it with the short, medium, and long nozzles. And assuming I am kind of intentionally aligning this 8 kilohertz peak, that varies based on insertion depth. Assuming I'm aiming for that to be the same on all of them, the frequency response is the same. Okay, there's no sound difference between them, but there might be a sound difference in your ear because in your ear, you're not necessarily going to be able to always consistently align that 8 kilohertz. But anyway, okay, so what you get with the sound here of the Kadenz is very similar to what you got with the Moondrop KATO, but it is subtly tweaked in a way that I actually kind of like, right? If you go back to my original review of the KATO, I probably would have described it as kind of a mild V-shaped sound signature with a little bit of low-end emphasis, right? And maybe a little bit too much low-end emphasis for my taste if I'm, you know, strictly going for my ideal neutral frequency response. And the Kadenz, well, they've actually subtly increased the upper mid-range here just by a bit. Like in terms of frequency response, you're talking like half a dB maybe, and slightly lowered the low end from like, let's say like 300 hertz down by, again, like a half a dB. And now half a dB is not that much, but in combination, especially with how wideband a change that is, it actually makes a pretty noticeable difference. And in my ear, it makes the Kadenz sound just overall more of a mid-rangey tune sound signature versus the KATO. Now it does still have a fairly warm low end. Like you can see that this bass rise is not, you know, starting below 100 hertz, right? This bass rise is kind of gradually petering up, you know, starting almost as early as like 300 hertz. So it's got like a nice meaty low end to it, but it's not emphasized very much at all. You can see versus my neutral target, it's basically neutral bass with just a bit of an extra bit of humph to it. And then there is a little bit of push in the upper mid range, and that just in combination gives it just this kind of midsy, forward vocal focused sound signature that frankly I kind of like. The one thing I will also call out is the treble is fairly tame on the Kadenz. In fact, I would say it's a little bit tamer than it was on the KATO. The KATO. That doesn't show up so much in the frequency response, which is interesting. If anything, I would kind of expect the Kadenz to sound brighter in the treble, but no, I overall actually hear the treble being a little bit more emphasized in the KATO, whereas here in the Kadenz, it's a little bit on the rolled off and relaxed side. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like the sound signature description, but let's talk about what it actually sounds like to my ear, and let's maybe continue with that treble, right? It does come across a little bit on the dark side, actually, I find, in the treble. Now, it does still have that forward character to the upper mid-range, which avoids it sounding like overall dark tonally. There's just like a relaxedness to the treble, and you can hear there's actually kind of like a dryness in the treble presentation. It's a little bit rolled off. But yeah, it can sound, because of that, a little bit dry. And a word that I wrote down here is like a little bit chalky, which is an interesting characteristic here. It's most noticeable on music with high frequency percussion. So if you're listening to music with hi-hats, specifically I noted down the Parcels Live album. They've got a lot of hi-hat, just like kind of constant. It has like an interesting, I'm saying interesting as like a positive, but it's a bit of a weird timbre to the hi-hats because of the treble presentation here. Now, conversely, the mid-range tuning on this guy is just fantastic. And like the texturing is like, it's awesome. It really does bring out really nice fine micro contrast in vocal content. Like I'm thinking Cigarettes After Sex, The Cure, that type of stuff. This does a really, really good job of. In fact, actually, did I note this down? I didn't note this down. The particular album that I really like listening to on this set is Feist's new album. It's called Multitudes. Just a lot of really good vocal content. If you're into that sort of thing, I think this really pulls it out quite well. And then the other thing that's quite standout on this IEM, even though it is a little bit less bass versus the KATO, I find that the bass is still like fantastic on this, right? And this is like a good example of what really good quality bass sounds like. But it's not coming because you get a lot of bass, right? And this is just, I felt like that was true of the KATO, and I feel like it's still true here of the Kadenz, is you just get a nice physicality, you get a nice punch, you get like this heft and body to the low end, but it's not dominant because it's not overemphasized. It's just, you know, it's very much there. It's assertive, but it is not dominant, and that much I really, really appreciate. And I think it's just better bass than, frankly, most bassy IEMs. Now, in terms of like the technicalities, I would say that it's okay. In terms of like image separation and stuff, this is not going to be the whitest sounding. Like it does a decent job of keeping sound separated. In fact, I would say it does a little bit better job versus the KATO, specifically on the Cure's Disintegration album, which is just kind of this heavy, densely recorded, a lot of instruments kind of going on at the same time. I feel like this does a better job of separating the drums than something like Closed Down versus the KATO, which does an okay job, but nonetheless, I wouldn't say that this is like a particularly wide presenting headphone. If anything, it's maybe slightly on the narrow side. It's just not congested, okay? And then I would say that maybe the only other kind of demerit is that it does have kind of this overall kind of dry character to it that I don't really remember in the KATO. In fact, in head-to-head comparisons, I kind of don't get that from the KATO. This just, it presents a little bit drier, a little bit more textured, I suppose, in the mid-range, but the downside is that well, the frequency or the timbre and high frequency percussion stuff comes across a little bit drier. And I guess that will lead us into the comparison section. So let's do some head-to-head comparisons versus the KATO. The KATO I would describe as overall a little bit on the warmer side, but really they're not that far off. If you like the bass levels on the KATO, you'll probably still be satisfied here with the Kadenz, but just expect it to be a little bit less bassy. The mid-range texturing on the Kadenz is what is standout and what is the differentiator. It's maybe subtle and it will depend on the music that you're listening to, but if you listen to a lot of vocal first content, I think it's going to come across. The high frequency percussion, again, I think that was quite a bit better here on the KATO, again, alluding to the Parcels live album. There's just something weird about the timbre of it here on the Kadenz. But then with The Cure, I thought The Cure just comes across way better on the Kadenz. Just a better sense of separation, and that vocal content just really does get pulled forward the extra bit with just that extra bit of clarity and texture on it. And also like Cigarettes After Sex, I would say I would take on the Kadenz. They kind of trade blows. Like if you've already got the KATO, you're not necessarily missing out on the Kadenz unless you want something that's a little bit more vocal focused. Conversely, if you don't have the KATO and you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't actually want the more vocal focused one, I want the one that's a little bit bassier, well, the KATO might still be your pick. Okay, let me pull in another IEM here. Here we've got the SIMGOT EA1000. And overall, I would say that the SIMGOT is just a lot brighter of a tune versus the Kadenz. I mentioned the Kadenz is a little bit rolled off, a little tame in the treble. That is not the case here with the EA1000. Now, the upside of that is that you get really wide sense of head stage and space and separation between sounds here on the EA1000. That's what this thing does really impressively. The downside is that it's just a little bit more aggressive sounding, which can work really well with a lot of music, but can also make it maybe a little bit more fatiguing and maybe just a little bit too contrasty and crispy with vocal content, which something like the Kadenz I think does a better job of. And finally, we're pulling this guy. This is Tanström's new Origin. Now the price on this one is quite a bit more expensive than the Kadenz at it was like 260 bucks or something versus 190 bucks. But you know, kind of same ballpark. All of these are single dynamic driver IEMs. But the Origin, I'm gonna say right now, is my favorite of the bunch that we have here on the table. Now, is it strictly better? I don't think so. There's some trade-offs. But I would say the Origin is overall my favorite. In terms of like that high frequency percussion timbre issues that I had here on the Kadenz, no such issues. Like the hi-hats just sound fantastic. They got a nice metallic ping to them, and it just sounds natural and normal. The other thing that's really nice with the Origin is the image separation is fantastic. Is it quite as exaggerated as it is on the EA1000? Maybe not quite as much, but it's pretty close, and you get it with a tune that is just a lot closer to a normal, natural, neutral tune versus the more aggressive EA1000. Versus the Kadenz, I don't want to say there's no comparison because it's not like a massive difference, but if you're looking for the IEM that's going to image wider and be a little bit more exciting with that separation, the Origin is definitely it. Where I would say that the Kadenz does have a slight advantage over the Origin is still, again, in that thing that it does really well, which is the vocal texturing. Again, Feist's Multitudes just sounds fantastic on this set. It sounds really good on the Origin as well, but I think it sounds kind of next level good on this. But again, it just kind of depends on what you're listening to. And that will lead us into me wrapping up this review. And that's kind of the gist of this IEM. Is this, well, this is the last of the K-lines. Is it the best? It depends on what you're listening to. If you're listening to vocal content, yeah, I think it is the best. If you're listening to rock with, you know, some hefty kick drums and shimmery hi-hats, maybe this one's not actually the best. But I don't know, that'll come down to you. Overall, honestly, the Kadenz, I really like this IEM. Out of 5 stars, I'm gonna give it a solid 4 stars. And if you wanna check it out, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and then I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the pitch.